Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with you. This particular subject is one that's dear to my heart. How do I find missing, quote, children in my tree? I'm sure most of you have come across places where you are pretty sure there's a child, but you just can't find them. So it works differently with different locations, but the basics are pretty much the same no matter where you're looking for these kids. So if you want to find a missing child, this is one way to do it. So you might ask, why look for missing individuals in your tree? This also, they don't necessarily have to have died as babies. Sometimes we just lose people. So this works kind of the same way. But you want to have a complete tree. You want to have a complete information tree. And so that's one reason why I like to find babies. Maybe they're not that important, but to me they are. Also, in my mind, I have found families, for example, where I would find a tree online that was already there, available, with two maybe kids in it or one. And then when I actually looked for other children, I have found up to 7 babies who were born and died before their 8th, before they were 8, 10 years old. And that makes me so sad. So when I'm looking for these people, these children, I'm trying to also understand how people felt, at the time, what was going on in their lives that would make them lose their children like that in the first place, and was there a big plague in their town at that exact time? I sometimes look through the parish records and see, oh my goodness, there are so many babies that died that year, things like that. So it helps me understand the actual lives of my ancestors as well. I'm sure that they were very unhappy with some of the things that happened with their babies. Another is it can help you with your DNA analysis, because if you actually do find other children in a line and you're looking for cousins, the cousins may be children of the missing people that you don't have. And my attitude is the Army's attitude: leave no family member behind. We need them all. We love them all, and we want to have them all available in our trees. So this is my process. It's basically the same process that I use for all my research. It is to first gather information, second, question, third, do the research itself, fourth, evaluate the research and add things that need to be added. And step 5 is the last one, to share and smile. So step 1 is to gather information about the target family that you're looking at. Of course, the first thing you always need in genealogy is names, dates, and locations. If you don't have all 3 of those, it's a little bit difficult to find information about anybody, much less about babies that never got recorded or that got recorded in only 1 or 2 places. So you have to have names, dates, and locations. Now, with babies and other people that you don't know, obviously, you need to know surnames. So be really careful about that, because the surnames could sometimes be different. They could be listed under other names, have names that you're not sure of. So that's kind of a thing. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. The first step really in any genealogy is to talk to family members, especially if they're closer to you in time. If you're doing something in the 1700s, 1800s, then you may not be able to get any information from family members other than maybe family legends or something, which can be really actually helpful in this case. So find what you can from your own families, record what they say, don't just, try to remember. And then if they tell you stories about the family, find those stories and look in the stories, because in those stories, you will sometimes find references to children that you didn't know about. So that's a very important part of this, is to find family stories or that have been put on, say, the memories or on Ancestry public trees and other sites, because sometimes you will find people that you have references that have not yet been documented. Find photographs, and if there are babies in there that you don't know who they are, and and nobody else does either, it's possible that they could be a missing child. Find personal letters, journals, cards, other written materials from your family that will lead you to names and people that you may be missing. And last of all, there's all these other things: Bibles, baby books, family records, newspaper clippings, wedding and birth announcements, funeral programs, school papers, passports, and medical records. So we're not just talking about little tiny ones, although that tends to be the ones who get lost. You can also find people who you think, who grew up, who you think you might be missing. So all these things will really help you in your search. Secondly, formulate a question. So once you have some information about a baby, or you at least think there may be one, these are some things you need to question. First of all, look at the date of marriage and the first known birth. I have found so many children who were actually born outside of the wedlock of the parents, who then later were married, or who were just born out of wedlock and before the mother got married, and they're not necessarily the father's child, the actual father of the family that came later's child. And in England particularly, they often just adopt the father's name after they were born. But if you didn't know they were born and they had a different name, or they died, you're not going to find them if you're looking past the date of marriage. So look before the date of marriage. Look at gaps between births. Brigham Young had a famous quote. He said, 9 months pregnant, 9 months nursing, and 9 months rest. So I always say, if there's a gap of more than about 18 months between two babies, and sometimes even earlier than that, but usually 18 months is what you're looking for, between 9 and 18. Look at the gaps between the births. And if there's a pretty long gap during the 1800s, particularly after the 1800s, that gets very much more iffy, but particularly before 1880 or so. And in some countries, of course, that never has changed, because people continue to have a high birth rate clear into the mid-2000s and beyond. But look at the gaps between the births. And if there's a big gap there, and I know Family Search will sometimes point that out to you, that's a big tell that there may be a child in there somewhere, stillbirth, or maybe there might be a miscarriage, but you wouldn't necessarily find a miscarriage. Look at the age of the mother at the last known birth. Now, we usually would say 45. That's a good rule of thumb. If the mother's 45, she probably won't have any more children after that. But again, I have known, and this is actual fact, I've known mothers in my family tree who have had children up into their early 50s, 52. So that is not, it just depends on when she stopped being fertile. So you never know. So I go past they're a little bit past, not super fat. I mean, they're not going to be having kids when they're 60. Naming patterns are important, because if you see in a family that they actually use the naming pattern, and I made a video of this about British naming patterns particularly, but it also applies in the United States to a certain degree. If you look at a naming pattern and you see this family is following the Scottish naming pattern, or this is following this pattern of names from traditional patterns, and there's all of a sudden a gap there in one of the names that they should have named after a grandmother or whatever, and yet there's another one that follows the pattern afterwards, you can sometimes find a child that's missing through that, because they would have given them that name but it died. And the other thing is, don't take for granted the fact that if a child was born and has a name, there wouldn't be another child with that same name earlier on in the family, because this happened a lot, where in the 1800s and earlier even, a person would have a child, the child would die, and then they would have another child later of the same sex, and they would just name the child after that first child. So that's a very common thing. So look for that. The death date of the father and mother. Go beyond the father's death date to find a child that might have been born after he died, because of course the mother could have conceived before he passed away and had the baby after he had died. I've seen that quite a bit. And also the mother, if the mother died a certain date, and is pretty young, she may have actually died of childbirth, from childbirth or shortly after childbirth. That's what happened to my great grandmother. She had a baby, the baby died. About 2 weeks later, she herself died another week later. So, if that baby didn't get recorded because it was a stillbirth or died right after birth, sometimes that will happen. You might want to check and see if the mother died in childbirth. Possible twins. So I know sometimes people figure, okay, there's a child this year or this time, there can't be another child, but that's not necessarily true. Of course, there are always twins. Now, especially in the 1800s, one of the twins died quite frequently. You didn't have a lot of twins that both of them lived beyond their early infancy. So look for possible twins. Another one is look at your DNA matches and see if there comes up some anomaly in your matches and you're like, who is this person related to? I don't have anybody in my tree that this person could be related to. So that's another thing for people who live past childhood. Okay, so those are some of the questions you're going to ask yourself. And when you ask yourself those questions, then you start looking for the things that will answer the question. So one thing that's really important is sometimes you just have to do a scorched earth. And I call scorched earth research that you just go to every time, every place, and every name that you can look for to find that person. So look for all the births in the area under that known surname, in the known residence area. All of them during the time gap that you're looking for. Go a little before the time gap, a little after the time gap. And look for all the births in the area under that known surname. Look for all the deaths in the area beginning at the earliest possible date of birth. And I would say not just, 9 months after what you think that you're looking for. If you're looking for a child who was born prematurely, he may have lived for a certain amount of time and then passed away. So I would say I usually start looking for deaths beginning before I think the child would have been born. Look for a child's birth under both the father's surname and the mother's maiden name, because if the child happened to be illegitimate in many places, the mother's name would be the maiden name of the mother, and the father's surname would not even be included at all on their birth record or the baptism record. It's really nice in British records on a lot of the parishes, not all, but in a lot of the parishes in Britain, they will write down that the mother's child is illegitimate. They will often say like if she's had already one illegitimate child, they'll say second illegitimate child or whatever. There are other names you can look for illegitimacy. I would use all the different they wouldn't necessarily say illegitimate. They could say bastard or other names like that in their languages. So it's not just it's not just that illegitimate name. You're not looking necessarily for just one word to say the child's legitimate. Look for baptism records, obviously. Even illegitimate children are usually baptized. Look for them before and after the birth. You can even look, in some cases, sometimes children were not baptized for several years because it cost money and they couldn't afford the baptism. So before the civil registration, if it's before babies were registered civilly, look for baptism records for a while afterwards. If you don't find anything in the records earlier, like around their birth date. Stillbirth, of course, would not be recorded on a baptism record, but they would probably be recorded on a death or buried. So look for cemetery records. Cemetery records, death records, parish records that have, the burial recorded. They didn't always record the death dates. They sometimes did, but they'll record the date of burial, and then from that you can usually extrapolate it was within 2 weeks, because they never hung around when they didn't embalm people. They didn't let them hang around for more than a couple of days before they buried them. Look in census records as well for names that just don't make any sense. So you have a name in a family and it doesn't make any sense to you. It could be because it's a child of a friend, who maybe the friend died, or maybe it could be a relative who had married somebody who didn't have that same name as the person in the census record has. So look for that. Look for different names than you expect in census records, and those can sometimes signal, oh, this is a child of somebody else in the family, or someone close to them, and they may have adopted that child. Look in census records, like I said, for relatives or family, friends, associates, neighbors. And then I always estimate the childbearing years for the mother of about 20 years after the marriage date, and a few years before the marriage date from the time she was 16. In some countries, even more, 14 would be it. So 20 years after the marriage date, at least, if she was young when she got married, longer than that. And however, before the marriage date until she was about 16 or 14, like I say in other places. Don't assume that just because a mother wasn't married, she didn't have children. So many women had illegitimate children, even in the olden days. They just did. So, it's possible. If you see an anomalous name, it's possible that it's an illegitimate child of the woman that was not married when she had him. And then the last thing, and this thing you really hate doing, I know, but you just sometimes have to do it. You just have to look through image sets. You just have to go to the original records, start at the date that you think you might be looking for a child, and just look through the image set until you get to the date where you don't think the child is going to be there any longer. I've done that many, many, many times, and I'm often successful. So look through image sets. I do have a video called Keys to Successful Research using the Research Wiki. This talks a little bit more about how to actually just do the basic research, and how to record things, and where you're looking and that type of stuff. If you're interested in that, I just threw that in there just in case you need a little bit of extra help on doing research. The fourth thing is to evaluate, and this is the tricky part, because in this case you have to use your own mind and your own logic and make sure that you're right. So review the records always as you're doing your research, and that's what's my Keys to Successful Research will help you do. Review the records, write things down, make sure you have everything that you've found or not found written in a log or whatever, so that you can look at it and review it. So review all the records, view the original documents or images whenever possible. Do not rely solely on an index unless there's absolutely no other choice. If it's somebody important to you, send away and get the original record or document from wherever you can find it. So if you find the original record online, you can snip and save it as a memory or whatever, put it in your log. I always put my logs online. It's so much easier. Decide what the information tells you then. Who is it? What did it happen? Where did it happen? What was it that happened? What was the event? If it's obviously not possible to be used, then don't bother with it anymore. Like if there just isn't anything there that makes sense, then leave it alone and don't go back to it. Just put it in the not usable pile. Organize the information according to what you found, according to who, when, where, and what, and then compare it to other information that you already have. It's sort of like a puzzle, you have to look at each piece and put it where it belongs. Then if you figure this is right, this is right, this is right, and that's right, and I have found this person, I'm pretty sure this person belongs to this family, then add those names, dates, places, and sources to your log. Add them to Family Search. Add them to other sites that you use so that other people can find them as well, and then continue researching. If you don't think if you're not satisfied, continue researching until you found all the information that you feel comfortable with to make sure that you're done with this person. And then the next thing is special situations. Some of the information you come up with may or may not work for especially family search, or you don't know how to enter it in family search. So this is kind of what this is about, particularly family search, but you can apply it to other sites as well. Okay. So if a person is stillborn, enter the child's name, sex, birth information, and death information into the family tree if you know it all. If the child lived a short time after birth, enter the birth and death information. A miscarriage can be added, but it's a custom event for the mother. Okay, so you don't want to add a miscarriage as a person, a separate person page. If they didn't name the child, for example, a lot of children when they were born and they didn't live, or they were even stillborn, if they didn't name the child or they didn't record the name, you can't find it anywhere, leave the child's first name blank and then enter the father's last name. Don't put child or baby or anything like that. Just don't put anything in. And then what happens if you print it out, if you're going to print it out to take to the temple, for example, it will show up as Mr. or Miss. If you do not know the father's last name and you know the mother's last name, or it'll probably be her maiden name, because obviously if it's her husband, it's going to be his last name. But if you know the mother's maiden name, enter her last name. So that's special situations for you to use. And then the next thing is share and smile. So I always like to say that genealogy is for everybody, not just people who do it, not the person who does the research, not just for your family. It is for everybody, because we are all family members of each other. So I always say, share the information, share what you found, share your sources, share everything with other researchers and family members and anybody who wants it. It is really not nice to keep information to yourself, if you ask me, because other people are related to this person too. And then finally, smile, because you did something wonderful to help somebody who would otherwise have been lost and never found. I just believe that genealogy is for more reasons than just finding your family. I think it's for remembering people. Just remember their names and share their names and know their names and just say their names. These are people, some of them, like these babies, nobody ever knew them. And so they're lost. They're really lost. But if we find them and put them in our trees and share them with other people, at least somebody can remember them a little bit, once in a while.
Jerroleen, there's a question in the webinar chat. What do you say about adoptions?
Okay, so adoptions on Family Search, you can actually make the relationship clear of what type of a relationship the child has to each of the parents. You can put a child who's adopted on Family Search with their adopted family as an adopted child, and you can then enter that child as well with his or her biological parents, if you feel that's appropriate. I mean, as far as you do on other things, like Ancestry or whatever, you can do whatever you want, obviously, but on Family Search, that's the way you can treat them. You can put them with either family and both families. Okay, so let's move on. I'm going to give you an example, okay? I just actually ran into this one just the other day. So here's an example of this family. It's the Rotherham Cook family. So Margaret Cook, by the way, she was an illegitimate, no, her mother, Mary, was an illegitimate child herself that I found. So Mary Cook married Isaac Cook and had Margaret. And Richard Rotherham, he had his parents as well, and they were married. So she took that name, Rotherham, and they had 3 children. You can see William, John, and Maggie, and I found those children. I just included the census because there were a lot of other, you can see there were 8 other hints that I could have included, but I didn't want to mix, I didn't want to mix you all up. So I just included the 1871 and 1881 census. This is what I found those 3 children in. And so I looked at her, and she was born in 1845, and her last child's born in 1883. And so that's 1844, I mean, and 83. And so, you know, that's a long stretch, but actually it worked out just fine. She, you know, age-wise, because she was married when she was 20, and so it's a good age for her. So I looked, however, between 1868 and 1883, and I'm like, oh my goodness, that is a huge gap there. So this one was really obvious. There were probably children in between there, right? And they probably all died. So I went ahead and started looking at those censuses, and you had the two censuses. She died before the 1891 census, by the way. So I couldn't get the 1890, and her husband died just before the census was taken. So I couldn't find them on the 1891 census. All I would have been able to do was find those 3 children that I had, okay, which I did. But anyway, so Mary Cook was her mother, and you can see there, her name is actually spelled with an E, but in so many records, the Cook name is spelled without an E. So you have to take that into account, that the name will change and change. And Rotherham is spelled in different ways too, especially without an H. So I had to take that into account as well. So in 1871, I have these 2 children, and then 1881, I have these 3 children. No, I have 3 children in both, and the wife down here as Margaret. Okay, so you can see that's, you know, that's what there was, and that's pretty good information, actually. The censuses in England are really good. Okay, so then the next thing I had to look at was these 4 things. The dates, you can see what I said, of 1863 to 1901. That's when she got married. She was married in 1863. I didn't find anybody before she was married, so she didn't have any illegitimate children. And 1882 plus or minus 20 years. The mother's maiden name was Cook, or Cook with an E. Father's Richard Rotherham or Rotherham, and place Ashton in Makerfield or Wigan or Lee or Lancashire. Okay, because in England we have jurisdiction areas, and so they could be under any of those different 3 or the county areas. Now, if you're searching for in England, and this is an English record. Now, in other countries, obviously, you're going to look in different places, but in England for this time period, I can search Ancestry, Family Search, FindMyP, the General Register Office, Free BMD, and MyHeritage, and some other places as well. So that's what I did. I just went to each one of them one by one and kind of saw what I could find and found. If you're searching in Germany, for example, you would maybe go to Matricula, or you could maybe go to some of the other sources for parish records. This is what I searched for, okay? And this is important, because this is how the easiest way to do this is in England. I don't know, maybe in other places it isn't. I do a lot of English research, but you've got the father's name. So I put the father's name in. I don't put a first or middle name in generally, because I don't know what it is. And then I put, you can see, I'm going to use my cursor so you can see. I put the birth year as 1872 on this particular one, because I could only add plus or minus 10 years. Okay, so that takes her to a year before her marriage, just in case she actually did have a kid before she got married, the year before she got married. So 1872 plus or minus 10 years. And then because I'm doing an ancestry search and they only allow you 10 years, I put another search together with an 1892. This is the general search here on the left, the general search in the collection that I was using. And this is just a general search for all collections, okay? So I did both of them for both, but I just wanted to show you both of them. Okay, and then I put Wigan on this one. I just put the county on that one, on the general search, because sometimes if you put an exact on a general search like that one, it won't come up right. I mean, a specific search on that one. And then here on the FindMyP, I personally, for English research, love FindMyP.com. So that's my go-to. So this is the one I first did. But I put the name, and here I didn't have a name variant. On this one, I put exact and sound likes, but eventually I did put a name variant on this. I don't like to start with a name variant because sometimes I get too many name variants on FindMyP particularly. So I didn't start with it. And then I put on this one, I could put 1882 plus or minus 20 years, you can see. And I put a very specific place because I know exactly where they were born. And FindMyP gives you a 5-mile radius circle. So it usually will come up with something if they're in Wigan or Lee records as well. So then I got 6 results on this one. And on this one, this is the FindMyP. You can see this slide that you can see there are actually 7 children there. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh no, there's 6. And so what I was able to do is I came up with a ton of Rotherhams, probably 40 of Rotherhams who were born in the Ashton-Makerfield area. And so I narrowed it down because that's a long time, 20 years plus or minus, that's 40 years. I mean, that's a long time. So I came up with a whole bunch. So then I narrowed the search by using the mom's name. And I used Cook first with an E, and then I used Cook without an E. And I came up with this many. Now, you must be aware that you won't always have the mother's maiden name on a record. German records, 90% of the time you will. On the German records that are in the 1800s and even before, you'll have the mom's married maiden name. But in English records, you will not always have them, particularly if it's like a parish record. So before 1837, you're not going to find the mom's name on the records as a general rule. But in this case, 1882 goes only 20 years go back to the 40s. And so that makes it so it's easy. I can find her name. So I did find that these are the 6 kids that came up under her name. And so now all I had to do was look at those records and see if they really could be her sons and daughters' records. So I wrote them all down. Now I knew John Henry, right? We already knew John Henry. We knew there was a Margaret, and we knew there was a, let's see, she was 1883, and then there was an Isaac. So we had all those kids already. So that was pretty easy, huh? Made it so it was pretty easy. We only had 3 names that came up. So this is what came up on Ancestry, on the other hand, and actually that's fine. This is good. It's good to have more names than not. It's just that FindMyP is easier, so I usually use it first. So I did look at all these records here. We had a bunch of records, 26 records that could have possibly been him, their children, I mean. And you can see some of them were born after she died, so that's not going to be much help to me, so I could just dismiss those. You can see the ones down at the bottom. Those I wouldn't even bother with because I know she died in 1890. She's not still alive. So anything after 1890 and this record I can just throw out. And then so I did, and then narrowed it down again, and I got these names. And here there are 7 names. I was a little bit mixed up. One of those kids does not belong to them. So I looked him up, however, the Thomas who was born in 1863. I did look him up, and he did not belong to them. Okay, so on other searches I did, and I did a bunch of other searches. I didn't just do those. I did other searches. I found death records. I found 1 marriage record for one of the kids. I found a baptism and burial records. I found census records, and so on and so on. So there were records. They just had not been found when I first did the tree. So these are the free BMD results for Thomas Rotherham, who was born in 1869, and this is his death. Final solution, though. This is what actually wound up when, after all was said and done, and I found a bunch of records. I actually did find 4 more children. 4 more children. So 3 of them died as infants, and 1 grew up and got married. I didn't find any children for her. I looked and looked, and I could not find any children for her. The other 2 sons did get married. William and John Henry both got married and had kids. This is the one that I found that I didn't have on the 1881 census, Margaret, Maggie. And she died in 1963. She's the one who got married, didn't have any children. But between them, I found, there were 7 other children between these two. So she and Richard lost these 3 little ones. And it was very, very sad that they had 3 children in a row who died. But fortunately, their last one, who was born when she was pretty old, lived and had a family of her own, even though she didn't have any children. So they're all on Family Search now and sourced. So that's what I did, and it was fun, and I enjoyed doing it, and I was very happy and smiled afterwards because I was able to find all these kids and put them into my records. So if you have any questions, I answer them now.
Jerroleen, there is a question about, it doesn't state what the record is, but she says, what if you have a record, but there's no indication of whether the child is female or male?
You can put that as unknown on Family Search, and of course on Ancestry or others as well. You can put it as unknown sex.
Another question is, what is freebmd.org?
So freebmd.org is actually, it has a good many of the records from General Register Office in Britain. I did a whole video on this, so you can go watch this. What is how do I use the free BMD in the General Register Office? The General Register Office doesn't have all the records indexed. They parceled it out at one point to free BMD, and then they ran out of money, and then they started putting them online. I mean, anyway, they went digital. So free BMD, what they want to do is get all the records that are in the General Registry Office online. And so now they're actually donation funded, but they have records. And the other thing you cannot get on the General Register is you cannot get marriage dates and names. So if you want to find a marriage, you pretty much have to go to freebmd.org in England after 1837. Because I will tell you, I don't know what happened, but it's really weird. Right around 1880, people in England stopped going to get their marriages sanctified by the church for some reason. So they'll have a marriage, but it won't be in a parish record for some reason. A lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times. So that's what happened. So yeah, that's free BMD. You can find my video on our website of videos, or you can find it in YouTube on our channel.
Another thought that was brought up by Gordon, and he mentions the problem with finding children when a child dies young and the parents name the next born child with the same name. And he gives an example. He says, for instance, my wife has a Richard Shannon born in 1848 and died 1878 in Family Search, but we recently found a death record stating he was 27 years old. If it weren't for a handwritten note on a family group sheet that her dad completed, we would never have sorted this out. It turns out that he had a handwritten note at the bottom indicating that there were 2 Richards. One was born in 1847 and another 1851.
That's very typical. That's what I was talking about. You will often find that. So in that case, what you're going to look for the gap there. You're going to look for the gap because that's probably where the child will be found, is in a gap. Normally when I find 2 names like that, there's almost always a gap. That's pretty obvious. So that's how you would find that child. When do records in free BMD start? Free BMD starts in when the General Record Office opened, which was in 1837. It doesn't start at the beginning of 1837 because the law didn't go into effect until later in the year. But you can find births, deaths, and marriages starting in 1837 in Britain. It goes up right now to I think it's 1987 for births, but I could be wrong. And there are other dates for the other 2. Marriages because of privacy don't go up, but deaths on the free BMD go up to either 1984 or 1987, something like that. And then you can start finding them again in the register, because then they digitized them, so they don't need to do them anymore on the free BMD. But it goes up. Deaths you can find up until 2021 right now. unless they've added another year. Yeah, but the problem with, okay, do I have a list of go-to places to search for records like knowing to go to free? Yes. Having a list of records is something that you can do on your own, and I'll tell you how to do that. There are a couple of ways to do it for different countries. Every single country in the world has a different list of records. So, you know, depending on who you're searching for. But the best thing to do is go to the research wiki and go to the country of origin and then click on online records. It's I call the magic blue button. I also have a video about using the wiki. So if you don't know how to use the wiki, go to that and it will tell everything that you need to know about the wiki. I've got 4 or 5 of them there. But that's what you do. So go to that list of records that are available online in your wiki page, and voila, you'll have a list of all the major places to go for the records. So someone's asking me about looking in Ancestry, Find My Past, and so on, and just searching around those records. Those sites, because they want you to use them, they all have tutorials. They all have helps. So if you don't know how to use a site like Find My Past, for example, go to the help, go to their tutorials that are online on YouTube, okay? And if worst comes to worst, go to the country of origin in Family Search, in the Family Search library, in their consultations. There's a place you can go for consultations, and it's called Online Help. Go there, schedule an online help with somebody like myself for that country, someone who uses the records there for that country, and just say, I really need a list of places to go, or I really don't know how to use Find My Past. The other thing that's a super place to go to learn how to use Find My Past, particularly in Ancestry, is to go, in MyHeritage, go to the Family History Guide. And that's what it's called, the Family History Guide. And they have tutorials for each one of those, and Family Search as well, of those sites. Okay, so those will teach you how to use those sites. All right, does that help? You found 5 children listed on the back of the mother's headstone. That's why cemetery records can be so helpful, because if you know where the cemetery is and can go to find a grave or something like that, they'll often list, like if they have a list of those kids on a headstone or something, it will be listed in Find a Grave, or also, you know, as a relative or something like that in a billion graves. And they probably all died. If they're not listed in the census records, she says they weren't listed in the census records, then they probably did pass away as little ones. All the videos that I've done are online through either YouTube or in our family history website on the list of Sunday videos. And then any other videos, there are tons of videos out there for help for other sites. They'll be on YouTube and you can just search for them. Okay, so yes, the GRO is really the only place that you can go to find maiden names for the most part. I did a whole, like I say, I did a whole video on using the GRO and others. So go look at that, and it will tell everything that you need to know about how to use the GRO and any of those other, the free BMD.